Hi, I'm Jack Sullivan, and welcome to Dr. Scary Tales, where we dive into stories that chill the soul and haunt the mind. Tonight's story is one I've been holding on to for quite some time. It's not something you'll find in the news or online forums. It's a tale that was passed down to me by a man named Tom Carter, an old friend of mine. Tom isn't the kind of guy to scare easily, but this story shook him to his core. It's about a drive, a storm, and what happens when you pick up the wrong passenger. Now, before we begin, I highly recommend putting on your headphones to fully immerse yourself in the story. Trust me, you'll want to hear every subtle sound. If you enjoy these tales, don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for more stories that'll keep you up at night. All right, let's get into it. This story takes place just outside a small town in Oregon, Elkton to be exact. Tom grew up there and would often take weekend trips back to visit his childhood home, nestled deep in the hills, surrounded by dense woods. One particular weekend, Tom was heading back home after finalizing the sale of his family's house, a place filled with memories, both good and bad. His father had passed not long before, and closing that chapter of his life was harder than he'd expected. It was raining heavily that night, a typical Pacific Northwest downpour, the kind where the rain comes down in sheets, obscuring the road and your vision. Tom had been on the road for hours, winding through those dark forested hills, trying to get back to Portland. The rain grew worse, slamming against the windshield, making the drive feel endless. The isolation of the road, the sound of the rain pounding the car roof. It was as if the world had closed in around him. That's when he saw it. A man standing on the side of the road, drenched, his car clearly broken down. Now Tom's a good guy, and stopping to help wasn't something he thought twice about, despite how eerie the situation felt. He pulled over, rolled down the passenger window slightly, and asked if the man needed help. The man, Derek was his name, looked grateful but uneasy, his face pale under the harsh beam of the headlights. He claimed his car had broken down, that he'd been stranded for over an hour. It was the kind of weather you wouldn't want to leave anyone in, so Tom let him in, even though something felt off. Tom told me that the moment Derek stepped into the car, something in the air changed. You know that feeling when the temperature in the room drops suddenly, and every instinct in your body tells you something's wrong? That's what Tom felt. He couldn't explain it at first, just this gnawing sense of dread clawing at the back of his mind. But he shook it off. After all, it was just a guy needing a ride in the middle of a storm. Still, as they drove on, the rain pouring harder than ever, Derek remained eerily silent. No small talk, no explanation of where he was going or how his car broke down. Just silence. Tom tried to focus on the road, but every few seconds he'd glance over at Derek, hoping for some sign that this was just an ordinary hitchhiker. Instead, Derek sat there, staring straight ahead. His soaked clothes clung to his skin, and his fingers tapped nervously against his knee, though his face stayed emotionless. Tom couldn't help but feel like he was being watched, even though Derek's eyes never left the road ahead. The rain wasn't helping either. It was relentless, hammering against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The further they drove, the more isolated they seemed. The road, once familiar to Tom, began to feel strange, foreign, as though they had entered a place that wasn't meant for them. The trees seemed to press in closer, their shadows long and menacing under the car's dim headlights. Tom tried to break the tension. "So, where were you headed?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Derek didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he muttered, "Doesn't matter much now, does it?" His voice was low, almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. But there was something about the way he said it that made Tom's skin crawl. That's when Derek asked, "You ever lose someone unexpectedly?" The question hit Tom like a punch to the gut. He thought of his father, of the sudden heart attack that had taken him just months before. The pain was still fresh, raw. Tom hesitated, unsure how to answer. Yeah, I guess I have." Derek nodded slowly, his fingers still tapping, his eyes still fixed on the road. "I lost someone too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas. He was a good man, didn't deserve what happened to him." Tom's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. The name meant nothing to him, but there was something about the way Derek said it, like he was holding onto a grudge that had never been let go. Tom tried to brush it off, but the unease continued to build, twisting in his gut. The rain intensified. It was like the sky had opened up, pouring down so hard it felt like the car was sinking into the road. But that wasn't what unnerved Tom the most. It was the knocking. At first it was faint, so faint that Tom thought it was just something rattling in the back of the car. But then it grew louder. A steady, rhythmic tapping coming from the glove box. Tom tried to ignore it, his heart beginning to race. But Derek didn't seem to notice it at all. Tap, tap, tap. Tom's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He tried to focus on the road, but his eyes kept drifting to the glove box. Why was it making that sound? What could be in there? Every second that passed made it worse. The tapping, the smell of dampness in the car, the oppressive weight of Derek's silence. Finally, Tom couldn't take it anymore. He reached over and yanked the glove box open, half expecting something to jump out at him. Nothing, just an old flashlight, a few crumpled papers and a wrench. But the smell was overpowering now. Wet, decaying leaves, the scent of something long dead. It filled the car, thick and suffocating. Tom slammed the glove box shut, his pulse racing. He glanced at Derek, half expecting him to react, but the man didn't even flinch. And then, without warning, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the car, loud and jarring, making Tom jump. For a second, it was nothing but noise. But then, there it was, a voice, distant, distorted, barely audible beneath the hiss of static. It was an old song, one Tom didn't recognize, a slow, haunting melody that sent chills down his spine. Derek finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. "You knew Lucas, didn't you?" Tom's heart stopped. "What? No, I don't know anyone named Lucas." Derek turned to him then, for the first time since getting into the car, and Tom could see the shadow of a smile on his lips. "You do. You just don't remember." The cold inside the car was unbearable now, like someone had opened all the windows. Tom's breath fogged in the air as he struggled to keep the car on the road, his mind racing. How did this man know him? Who was Lucas? Derek's voice grew darker. "He died right here, you know, right on this road. And you were there." Tom shook his head, panic rising in his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about, but deep down something was stirring. A memory, long buried, something he had tried to forget." "You do know," Derek whispered, his voice almost soothing now, like he was coaxing a confession out of Tom. "It was a night just like this. Rain pouring down, the road slick, and you, behind the wheel, not paying attention." Tom's mind flashed back to a moment years ago, a rainy night much like this one. The roads had been slick, the rain blinding. He had been driving fast, trying to get home, and then a flash. The sickening sound of metal crunching, the sudden jolt of impact. But there had been no one around, at least that's what he'd told himself. He hadn't stopped, he hadn't looked back. Tom's hands trembled on the wheel. "No! That can't be." But Derek was relentless. "You killed him, Tom, and now you're going to pay." Tom's mind raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. The car swerved as he struggled to maintain control. Derek's words echoed in his mind. "You killed him!" But it wasn't true, it couldn't be. The tapping in the glove box grew louder, more violent, and Tom swore he could hear something else now beneath the noise. A voice, a whisper, calling his name. He glanced over at Derek, but the man was no longer there. The passenger seat was empty, the door shut, no sign of him. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he swerved the car to a stop on the side of the road, gasping for breath. And then, silence. For a moment, all he could hear was the rain pounding against the roof of the car. The glove box was still now, the tapping gone, but the smell of decay was stronger than ever. With shaking hands, Tom opened the glove box one last time. Inside, lying atop the crumpled papers and the flashlight, was a small, soaked photograph. The ink was smudged from the water, but Tom could still make out the image. It was a man standing beside a car wreck. The car was mangled, the trees behind it dark and menacing, and scrawled on the back of the photo in messy, dripping ink were the words, "Lucas, Elkton, 1984. Tom's heart stopped. He knew that wreck. He knew that name. The memories came flooding back, clearer now. How he had driven away that night, how he had never told anyone. He had been responsible for Lucas's death. Suddenly the cold returned, creeping up Tom's spine. He looked up into the rearview mirror, and there, in the back seat, was the passenger. Drenched in rainwater, his eyes empty and hollow, the passenger stared back at him, a ghostly figure, waiting. Tom's scream was lost to the storm. Tom never spoke about that night again, but the road remembers. It remembers every life it takes, every soul it claims. And on nights like these, when the rain pours down and the roads are empty, some say you can still see him, Lucas, or maybe just his passenger, waiting for the next driver to make the same mistake. If you ever find yourself on a rainy night drive, alone on a dark road, don't pick up any passengers. You might not be the only one in the car. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for more stories like this. Stay safe out there, and remember, not all ghosts stay buried.